up, everyone? Welcome to the B&B Archery YouTube channel. For today's video, I wanted to do a tech tip that could apply to everyone. Now, I know not everybody sets up their own bow, but whether you have your bow set up at a pro shop or you do it on your own, it's super important for you to take some setup notes once you get your bow shooting exactly how you want it. So before we go into that, I've got my own personal Hoyt RX8 Ultra here right now. I'll go through my setup. This has 80-pound limbs on it. I'm sure it's not shooting at exactly 80 pounds. It's probably about 77, 78 pounds. I've got a Hamsey Epsilon rest. I'm shooting the Option Archery Canyon Pounder sight in the 5-pin configuration, 19 thousandths. I've got a 12-inch Shrewd front bar with a quick disconnect, and I've got a 7-inch Shrewd back bar. I don't know exactly what weight I got on there. I'd have to count. What do we got? 2 ounces on the front and 3, 4, 5 ounces on the back. So nothing crazy heavy. The arrow that I'm shooting out of this bow is the new Easton X10 Parallel Pro. I'm shooting this one on a 300. Usually I shoot a 250 at my draw length of 30.5, but this arrow seemed to respond a little bit stiffer than, say, an Axis 4mm, which I typically shoot. So this arrow's coming in right at 470 grains. Up front, I've got the Evolution Outdoors glue-in components, so it's a 150 grain point with a 10 grain collar. And on the back end, I've got a 3-fletch AAE Hybrid 26 wrap and an AAE IP knock. It's shooting this arrow at 287 feet per second, which is right where I want to be for that. I like to be between 280 and 290 for all of my hunting setups. So, getting into the setup notes, the first thing that we're going to go ahead and we're going to check is going to be our peak weight as well as our holding weight. So to do that, we're going to use just a handheld draw scale. We'll turn this on. All right, so we are at 77 pounds and 6.9 on the holding weight. So I would just take a notebook while we're doing this and just set yourself up. Go ahead and write all of this stuff down. So again, we said 80-pound limbs, but it's peaking out at 77 pounds with 6.9 on the holding weight. Next thing we're going to check is we're going to check the axle-to-axle measurement as well as the brace height. So again, this is the Ultra, so this is the longer axle-to-axle bow. Measuring in at exactly 34 3/4 on the axle to axle, and the brace height is exactly 7 inches. The draw stop setting right now, I'll flip this around here in a second so you guys can see it. The draw stop setting is on the little D, which is actually 30 1/4. I like my bows to measure at exactly 30.5 inches of draw length. Now, most bow manufacturers, the bows don't measure exactly what the setting is for. And I'm going to show you guys exactly how to measure your exact draw length here in a second. But the nice thing about this Hoyt cam is that I've got 1/4 inch draw length adjustments on this. So I can really fine tune it to get it at exactly 30.5 like I like. And I'm shooting this right now at the 85% let off with the hard back wall. So again, all of this stuff, I'm just going to jot down in my notes. And when we get to the end, I'm going to explain to you guys why this is so important. So next, we're going to go ahead. We're going to move over here to the draw board to take a couple other additional measurements. So we're just going to draw the bow back. Now, this is where we're going to be able to see what the difference is between the module setting and what the actual measured draw length is. So right now on the modules, I've got it set to 30 1/4. But we like my actual draw length to be 30.5. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to measure from the pivot point of the grip to the knocking point on the string. And we're going to add 1.75 inch, right? So this should be at 28 3/4 when I measure this in order to get exactly 30.5 inches. So when I do that, we take a look, and right there to the knocking point, we're right at 28 3/4. Now, if this was off, say I had this set at, you know, the actual 30.5 inch post setting, it would actually be drawing at 30 3/4, right? So these new Hoyt bows, they're drawing about 1/4 inch long. This is one of the most overlooked things. A lot of places just put it to the draw length setting and send you on the way, and sometimes you're like, man, why do I just feel like I'm too stretched out? Some companies can be upwards of an inch and 1/4 too long. So this is going to be a really, really important thing to check. Now, the next thing we're going to check while we're here is we're going to take our arrow, and we're actually going to check our peep height with the bow at full draw. And the reason that we like to do this at full draw is every bow is a different axle to axle. So when you go from one bow to the next, at rest, the peep height might not be the same from the knocking point to the peep. But when we do it this way and we measure from the center of the arrow to the center of the peep, it's going to be roughly the same no matter what bow you're shooting. Now, my only caveat to that is going to be that for different types of setups, you're going to want to lock in your peep height at a different distance. So for example, if I'm shooting an indoor bow, I'm just shooting indoors at 20 yards, I'm going to want to get my sight set at 20 yards and get that peep exactly where I want it, right at 20 yards. Now for my personal hunting bow, I'm going to do that at 40 yards. And the reason I'm going to do that is on this Canyon Pounder sight, my middle pin, my mover pin, is the center pin on my housing, right? So I've got 20, 30, 40 as my mover, 50, 60. So with this set at 40, that's my home setting, all of my pins are right on the mice. That's where I want it to be the most comfortable. Now, if I were to do that with this center pin all the way up at 20, right? When I close this up, all of those pins are going to be off. And if I were to roll this back down to 40 afterwards, I'm just going to be floating around in my peep sight a little bit too much. Now, if I were building this bow out for, say, Total Archery Challenge, where the shots are a lot further, you know, it's really, really common for us to have an 80 to 110 yard shot, I might go ahead and set my peep height with my bow at 55 or 60 yards. That way, when I'm getting into those longer distances, I'm not floating too far out of my peep. It's nice and comfortable, and I'm locked in. All right, so let's go ahead. For this, I'm going to use a machinist ruler. It's just a little bit more specific and precise, I think. So again, we're going to measure from the center of the arrow shaft to the center of the peep. And right now on that, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm right at 3 7/8 of an inch. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jot that down. We've got a couple other measurements that we're going to take care of, and I'll do that over here back on the workbench. So let's get this thing out of the drawboard. So the next thing that I'm going to measure is going to be my D-loop length. And that's super important because as you're working your anchor position, if you change your D-loop length, it changes the position of your hand on your face. Now with our draw length, we want it to be exact to where that string's coming right across the tip of our nose and right past the corner of the mouth. So we're going to fine tune where our anchor position is with our D-loop length. Now on mine here, if I measure with the machinist ruler again, from the center to the edge, I'm right at exactly 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so 3/4 of an inch, that's repeatable. I know I can tie that and come right back to it. And the last thing that I'm going to measure on this bow is going to be the position of my rest. All right, so I'm going to loosen this hamski here. And I'm going to use this hamski tool on an arrow. I'm just going to slide it over here. Now, starting point when I'm setting my rest, most of the time on a bow, it's roughly 13/16. And then what I'm going to do is in paper tuning, I'm going to shim the cams first before I do anything. And then my rest is going to be a last resort. So on this bow, looking at this this Hamskea center shot tool, my left and right is right at 12/16. Okay, so I've moved it a 1/16 of an inch over from where I was at the starting point while we were tuning. Now for my up and down, Hamskea does have a thing on here that you can measure what your knock height is, but on Hoyt's shelves, they're a little bit curved. So I'm actually not going to use this tool to measure my height. What I am going to do is I'm going to measure just with an arrow square to see how knock high I am on the bow. All right, so with the Hamskea, we typically start at square, and then in tuning, I find that it goes typically between a 1/16 of an inch and an 1/8 of an inch knock high. So I'm just going to pop this square on here. I'm going to run it flush. And as we're looking here, it's falling that bottom knocking position right at a 1/16 of an inch knock high. Okay, so in going through all of this, the reason that we're doing this, and again, the more specific notes that you take, the better. Because if we're shooting and we're shooting great, and we're like, wow, this is great, and then all of a sudden we start shooting like crap, now we have something that we can go back to diagnose exactly what might have changed. Now, the number one culprit of that a lot of times is as strings and cables settle in, you might lose a little bit of poundage. So, you know, if we started with 77 pounds and we notice over time I'm having some low impacts, I'm going to go back, I'm going to check the peak weight and the holding weight. Oh, I lost a pound. Maybe I might add a half twist or a full twist into my cables to get that poundage back. So if you don't have those notes, then you're just playing a guessing game. So that's our tech tip for today. Take some setup notes. If you need to, have your pro shop help you out with this. I'm sure they wouldn't mind taking 5 minutes just to help you take some of these measurements. If you like the video, go ahead and click that subscribe button. We're going to try to keep up and put some regular videos out with some good tech tips. So thanks for watching, everyone.